Hey everybody, and welcome to another Tausken review. Today we're going to be taking a look at Star Wars Squadrons, EA's latest Star Wars game from Motive Studios, who helped with the development of Battlefront 2. Squadrons is a much smaller game than Battlefront or even Jedi Fallen Order. At $40, it's a much more focused experience on Starfighter combat. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as it really does capture the magic of things like X-Wing from back in the 90s. Starting off with the campaign, Squadrons features a 14-mission campaign, not including the prologue. You can play as both Imperials and Rebels after the events of Episode 6 and the destruction of the Death Star. I really liked how they tried to personalize both the sides by getting both Imperial and Rebel characters to play as. As Rebels, you'll play as Vanguard Squadron, while as the Imperials, you'll play as Titan Squadron. Each squad has its own host of characters whom you can interact with both during, after, and before missions individually, and together in the briefing for each mission. The characters themselves are unfortunately not the greatest, particularly the Rebel ones. I did find the Imperial ones much better and felt like they had much more of a personality to them, but the Rebel ones felt very lifeless, generic, and poorly written, which is a shame because some of the Imperial characters felt great. If the Rebel characters played a lot more like that and had much more of a personality to them, the whole game experience would have been a lot better, and would have made a lot of these sequences that you're talking to different characters feel much more pointful. I ended up feeling like I was kind of wasting my time a lot of times talking to these different Rebel characters because they were just so boring and uninteresting to talk to. The overall story is unfortunately a bit generic. It's not terrible by any means, but I just feel like they could have done more with the characters to make it much more exciting. The events that are happening are okay, the set pieces are great, but it just feels like you don't have enough of a character story to really push this forward and make it engaging. The dialogue is just boring and awkward. There's also these really strange pauses where characters will be talking to you and they'll have like 3 or 4 completely different things they'll say, but it'll be broken up by like a 5-second pause. And it's really weird. It's almost like at some point maybe they had planned to have like a dialogue tree that you could choose different dialogue options to characters, but then got rid of that. So instead they just kind of had these awkward pauses. I don't know, but it's just kind of weird to me. Missions themselves are fortunately very good though. They're very interesting. They have a lot of varied and interesting objectives. There's some that you'll be doing like a bomber mission versus like a fighter mission. Sometimes you'll be playing more of like an escort or a support role, which is fun. There's a lot of pretty interesting locations you'll fight in that are pretty great and really have a lot of very fun visual elements to them, or even interactive elements, or they'll have different terrain pieces that you can use for covering things that make it a lot more fun and engaging. This leads me to the gameplay, which is definitely the highlight of Star Wars Squadrons. It's much more engaging and in-depth than, say, Battlefront 2's Starfighter Assault gameplay mode. There's a lot more to do. You've got things like power systems you can choose between, so you can choose to like use your engines or your weapons or your shields at max potential. If you're playing as Rebels who have shields, you can actually move your shield from the front to the back of your ship. These give you pretty interesting strategic choices, and you can even do things like if you're a TIE fighter, you can overpower your engines or your weapons, which will give you more boost immediately or more damage. These make for pretty fun choices that you can make mid-flying, so you can decide like quickly I need to get more engines to get away. You can do all sorts of interesting maneuvers too, where you can like drift your starfighter as you're like moving, which is pretty fun. The combat itself is a lot of fun as well because they don't have like a targeting reticle like in Battlefront where like it shows you exactly where to shoot to actually hit the enemy. So you have to carefully design and use skill to actually choose where to fire so you'll actually hit enemies. There's also different weapons too, like things like missiles or chaffs type of stuff that can break up missiles if you're getting hit. There's repair systems to repair you. There's different things that will disable enemies. There's also even support abilities, so you can use things like putting a shield on somebody. It's just a lot of different interesting strategic choices and different loadout things that really make the starfighters feel a lot more in depth. I also felt like, compared to Battlefront at least, in Battlefront it kind of felt like each starfighter was sort of like a paper tiger. Like every starfighter would just blow up in an instant when being focused down. But in this game it feels like they're much more meaty and beefy and have a lot more to them. It doesn't feel like they're blown up as easily. And this just creates a lot of fun moments when you're trying to carefully maneuver your starfighter to attack somebody or bomb a capital ship or something. And this leads me to the multiplayer, which is a bit of a mixed bag, unfortunately. I was pretty excited to play this mode, but I feel like the multiplayer just feels a bit underdeveloped. And I guess being that it's only a $40 game, you can't obviously expect everything, but there's only a handful of multiplayer maps, and most of them are just campaign maps that are regurgitated or maps that have open fields, which is kind of boring because the maps that have terrain that you can actually swoop around between are significantly more interesting than maps where it's just an open field. Now, the multiplayer is split into 2 different modes. You've got Dogfight and Fleet Battles. Dogfight is my personal favorite because it feels like it captures the magic a lot better and it's a lot more well designed. Dogfight is a 5-on-5 team deathmatch with the first team to get to 30 kills wins. It feels pretty fun, especially when you get the maps that have like interesting terrain pieces or a station to fight amongst or something, so you have terrain and cover to move around. It's just a lot of fun when you're just battling it out with utter skill trying to defeat the enemy team, and feels very visceral and really captures the magic of the Star Wars movies with starfighter combat. It also has some interesting strategic and team play opportunities, as you could team up with players or try and help each other out, say taking a tail off another player, or if you're playing a support class, you could try and shoot the shield thing to put over players to try and help them out. There's different loadout opportunities as well. It feels like obviously the balance isn't perfect, like you can have more of a meta build amongst different ship classes, but I feel like there's some interesting choices still that you can play here between different types of weapons that you. Unfortunately, the bummer is that there's only one ranked multiplayer mode, which is unlocked at level 5 for fleet battles. So Dogfight, which is my favorite, doesn't actually have a ranked mode to it, which is a real bummer because the ranked mode for fleet battles does not work very well at all. Fleet battles is basically a more epic style, sort of Battlefield-esque multiple objectives type of thing. You basically have 2 capital ships. The goal is at the beginning of the match, you fight out in the middle with a dogfight, see who wins, then you get an advantage which you can use to push against the enemy team. You have to destroy their defensive frigate ships. Once you defeat that, you can actually push on to the capital ship and destroy that. It feels like it'd be a pretty cool idea, right? You go out, you battle, you take out the capital ships, and then you get some fun, interesting sequences that feel a lot like the movies as you're blowing up different components and pieces like the shield generator or the engines of an enemy ship. But to me, it felt like it was very much a one-sided snowball. Like, it's very, very hard in this mode, I feel like, to actually get an interesting match. The ranked matchmaking system is just not very good. It doesn't do a very good job, and the design of the mode does not really lend itself to having balanced matches. It feels like often, most of the time, one player gets an advantage and is able to push the game and then ends up just destroying the enemy team and camping them in their system. It just doesn't feel like this mode, which is supposed to be like the core central mode of the multiplayer, is very well designed. And there's tons of different exploits people use and other problems because of the fact that people can just leave mid-match while you've spent like 20 or 15 minutes on a match, and then the whole thing is just ruined because there's no real significant penalties or anything that really prevents somebody from just leaving. So I feel like basically 99% of the time I'm in a match, somebody just leaves, and it leads to a completely unfun and uninteresting multiplayer ranked experience, and why I would so much more enjoy playing Dogfight ranked, because it's much more fast-paced, it's much more simple, it just feels much more well-designed in this overly complex, pointless, uninteresting mode. Now moving on to the graphics, I'd say that for the most part they look pretty good. The interior design of the cockpits is pretty fun, even though maybe like, you know, it's a little imbalanced given the fact that like X-Wings versus TIE Fighters have completely different fields of view, but it's fine. It still is fun and it really captures the magic of Star Wars. The interesting environment locations look pretty great. I really love the backdrops and the way they've designed that. But one thing I don't really like is the explosions on ships, particularly the larger ships like frigates and capital ships and things like that. Just look a bit bland and could have used some more work. It is worth mentioning that unfortunately this game is just not 100% polished. Like, I ran into some issues with the game crashing on me once or twice. I ran into problems where like sometimes my keyboard keys would be the only thing that would work when I'd go into a menu, so like my mouse would just disappear and I couldn't even use it, and I'd have to use the up down arrow keys to try and maneuver around. Things like that are just really strange, and there's other problems where sometimes it would disconnect me from a multiplayer game that just make it obvious this game isn't 100% polished and really could probably use some more time baking. Overall, Star Wars Squadrons gets a 7 out of 10. And I don't want to put that down and say the game is bad, or I say that you shouldn't get it, or that it's average, because it's really not. The gameplay is like a 9 out of 10 alone. It's so good. It feels so much like those old X-Wing Alliance or the TIE Fighter games, the things that made those games so much fun. Like, it has elements of those that make this such a much more interesting experience than, say, Battlefront 2 Starfighter Assault. There's so many interesting strategic decisions like maneuvering and redistributing your power, changing your shield direction, overpowering different systems, the different loadouts you can choose that make the gameplay so much fun. What really holds this game back is the bland story, the bugs, and the multiplayer really could have used a little more refinement. It's nice that EA kind of turned themselves around after the game launched and added more maps and new ship types, but there really could have been better maps at the beginning, maybe some more options between like the fleet battles and the dogfight system, some other ranked options, something to really add more depth to this multiplayer system so that it wasn't just so kind of generic. Honestly, for $40, you're getting a pretty fun experience. The campaign's a little short if you play on the lower difficulties. I played on Veterans, it took a little bit longer, but if you're looking for something that's just fun, you like the interesting starfighter combat, it looks exciting to you, then pick this game up because it's a lot of fun. But if you're looking for a more of a deep, engaging story, you probably want to hold off for a sale. If you're looking for the multiplayer and think that dogfighting looks fun, sure, pick it up. It's a lot of fun. But I wouldn't really recommend picking this game up alone based off fleet battles because it's just not a very good experience. Overall, though, Star Wars Squadrons is a pretty fun game that I feel like does something very unique compared to other Star Wars games EA has made. I'm very excited that this game came out. I really hope that they expand upon this in the future with a sequel or something because it's got just such a cool, interesting base that could really be turned into something fantastic down the road.